relied upon juries for consideration of difficult cases. We have recognized for hundreds of years that a jury's deliberations, discussions, and votes should remain their private affair as long as they wish it. Therefore, the law gives you a unique privilege not to speak about the jury's work. Although you are at liberty to speak with anyone about your deliberations, you are also at liberty to refuse to speak to anyone. A request to discuss either your verdict or your deliberations may come from those who are simply curious, from those who might seek to find fault with you, from the media, from the attorneys, or elsewhere. It will be up to you to decide whether to preserve your privacy as a juror. Is there anything we need to take up before the jury before they're sent back to the jury room to be discharged?
No, Your Honor. No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Ladies, thank you very much. You will be taken back to the jury room to be discharged.
Now they can breathe a little and let it sink in this Seminole County courtroom where this highly anticipated verdict has just come down from the jury. Not guilty of second-degree murder. That was the charge against George Zimmerman.
Mr. Zimmerman, I have signed the judgment that confirms the jury's verdict. Your bond will be released. Your GPS monitor will be cut off when you exit the courtroom over here, and you have no further business with the court. Okay, thank you. Is there anything else this court needs to take up before we recess for this case? Thank you all very much. Court is, the evidence will be released. The evidence will be released.
Judge Deborah Nelson had made it clear that nobody was to make any sound as the verdict was announced, and indeed everyone followed that instruction to the letter. George Zimmerman barely showed any reaction, maybe the hint of a smile when they first said not guilty, but really stayed placid through all of that proceeding. Let me bring in Pete Schulte, law enforcement expert, a former police officer, former prosecutor, right now a defense attorney. It's remarkable after such a long day of deliberations and so much speculation about what the jury might be thinking, which way it might go. What's your initial impression of all of this?
Well, Lisa, I'll tell you that I'm not surprised that the jury came back as not guilty this late, especially after the note they sent out earlier. It was clear very early on with that note that they weren't going to be considering second-degree murder anymore. Then it was going to come down to there's a paragraph in the jury charge that talks about self-defense. And in Florida and a lot of other states, once the issue of self-defense is raised, the burden of proof then shifts back to the state to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that self-defense was not justified the murder of Trayvon Martin. And that is almost an impossible burden. So from the legal community perspective, I think that we thought that this case was overcharged. The fact that the prosecution was asking for a lesser included, almost manslaughter, almost never happens. So this is not a big shock for the legal community, but I think, I could hear almost a pin drop in that courtroom when the judge released the verdict. So I can imagine it's basically going to be very interesting in Florida tonight.
And you would think that with so much right now, let me just reset what's happening in the courtroom. George Zimmerman is, surrounded by his attorneys. He's talking to a couple of the court officers because, again, as the judge said, he's going to be able to lose the GPS device now. He's going to be a completely free man again. It looks like he's gathering up some personal effects. His family is there. The defense attorneys are there. He's looking a little more relaxed. His wife is wiping away tears. Everyone's looking a little more relaxed. There are tears on a number of faces in the courtroom now. Now his mom is reaching out. George Zimmerman's mom and dad hugging him, holding his hands. They're smiling. Now you can see a little bit of the emotion start to flow after so much tension in the room before the verdict was announced after this 3-week trial. And as you say, such a charged atmosphere. Zimmerman now is still sort of talking to his attorneys. He's smiling a little, but it's still a relatively subdued reaction. And again, I think it's probably just taking some time for it all to sink in. But Pete, when you talk about the burden that the prosecutors had in this case, the overwhelming burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and it would seem, when you think about all the debate about was there really self-defense, when there's so much debate about something, that in and of itself would seem to raise reasonable doubt.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and the jury charge, I have to tell you, was very complicated for that jury to follow on. But the most telling point of it is, like I said, it was on, not to be specific, I know we're on radio, but page 12, the very last paragraph, stated that if you do not believe beyond a reasonable doubt that George Zimmerman was acting in self-defense, or if you have a reasonable doubt thereof, I mean, think about that for a second. If you think that he could have, or maybe, or probably was using self-defense, that equals an acquittal. And that's the burden of proof we're talking about. Somehow the state of Florida, the prosecutors, had to overcome that burden of proof, saying that it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt that he did not use self-defense. And that is an incredibly high burden.
And George Zimmerman now strolling out of the courtroom after an emotional scene. Tears finally started flowing. Fox News Radio's Evan Brown is at the courthouse in Sanford, Florida. I see a lot of hugging now in the courtroom.
You will see probably more of that hugging, at least from the side of the Zimmerman family and their defense team. George Zimmerman himself still appearing a bit subdued, but that is sort of the type of person we've seen him to be on his any type of media appearances. We've seen him, and they have been few and far between. But throughout this 3-week-long trial, he has shown little emotion or movement through much of it. So to see that again now, he's probably just having it sink in. Of course, the rest of his family seems to be elated. His wife, Shelley Zimmerman, wiping away tears, and certainly the lawyers patting themselves on the back. We will expect to hear from at least the lawyers later on. Outside the courthouse now, there has been a smaller crowd of demonstrators throughout most of the day. It is now dark. It is hard to see what they're doing, but this is a crowd of people who had ranged from supporters of George Zimmerman, insisting that he had broken no law, to detractors of George Zimmerman, calling him a child killer and a murderer. The court now saying that he is not either of those, that he is not a murderer, that he acted in self-defense. Lisa?
Yeah, and his mom and his dad, Zimmerman's mom and dad and brother, I think it was, all gave great big bear hugs to the lead defense attorney, Mark O'Mara. But again, as O'Mara said during his closing argument, it was a truly sad case, no matter which side you looked at it from, and there were compelling arguments on both sides, but it